You know something? You're not always right.
Hello again everyone, and welcome back to another one of my Yap sessions. And today's Yap session is about James Gunn's soon-to-release film, Superman Legacy. Or I guess now just simply, Superman. And all I gotta say is, I'm pretty hyped for this movie. A bit of backstory, I'm actually a pretty big Superman fan. I was actually introduced to Superman through the show Smallville when I was a kid and had a lot of exposure mostly through that and the DC animated universe before getting into a lot of the other comics and reading a lot of the Superman classics over the years. Now, I'll also say this, I'm a big fan of James Gunn. I genuinely think he's the last director who can actually sell a film based on his name alone. I was introduced to his work with the Guardians of the Galaxy films, but soon watched a lot of his previous and future filmography. And man, this is the director that is perfect for comic book movies. Like, he genuinely seems like someone who loves comics, and not just superhero comics, but the entire medium and storytelling styles within that medium. All of his films have this sort of comic bookish, pulpy style, but still take themselves seriously enough so the audience can care and form attachments. So, of course, when I saw that he was the one who was going to make a new Superman film, as well as become the new head of DC's films and creating a new DC cinematic universe, I thought he was perfect for the job. And now I've seen all 3 trailers for his new film, but then something I'll call interesting for the sake of kindness started to happen. Many people just started coming out of nowhere, just started making absurd claims, like, why is Superman getting beaten? This isn't Superman. Why is Superman saving people? Isn't he supposed to fight the big threats? And I can go on and on and on, and this is where I get to the point of this video. I feel like I'm seeing this from many places on the internet, and don't get it twisted. There's a lot of people who seem to be genuinely excited and giving praise to the trailers we've seen of the film so far. But there's still so many other people that either want to say this film is bad because of the trailers or just hate it because it's not gonna be like the Man of Steel. So, in a way, you could argue this video has one central theme. And that is, James Gunn gets Superman, and has already shown so through the trailers alone. Well, I guess there's a second theme, but let's be real, people are going to give their opinion, especially if they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Allow me to say one thing first. If you're gonna argue that this video is about me gatekeeping on how someone should write Superman, no, I'm not gonna make that argument. In fact, I think you have all the right in the world to write any character however you want. But if you're trying to adapt a character, story, or concept into a separate medium, I think it's an artistic imperative, if not a goal, to at least try to get down the core concept of the thing you're adapting. I'm not saying you have to adapt something one for one because that's literally impossible and even illogical. But you have to understand the deeper intentions, themes, and the goals of the work you're trying to base your work on. To share an example of stories that do this really well, I like to bring up the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films, specifically Spider-Man 1 and 2. Now, these stories are not one-to-one with how the original comics are, but I really doubt anyone in good faith could say that these films don't understand the intention and themes of a Spider-Man story. So, you're probably asking me then, what is the core theme of Superman? Why does Superman work? Well, let's go all the way back to his creation for a moment. As you all probably already know, Superman was created by the duo of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. Both of these men were of Jewish descent and came from immigrant families. Siegel was born in Cleveland, Ohio, to 2 Jewish immigrants who fled the discrimination of their people in the country of Lithuania, of which it was part of the Russian Empire at the time. He was a firstborn American in his family, but also still deeply tied to his Jewish roots. Shuster has a similar story, but he was actually born to Jewish immigrants in Toronto, Canada. However, he eventually moved to Cleveland, Ohio as a teen, which luckily, him and Siegel went to the same high school when they were teens. And ever since then, they were friends, mainly working on stories and creative projects they would work on together. Of course, they worked on a lot of stuff over the years, much of it for DC Comics, but their most important and historically important creation was that of Superman. So, what was the idea of Superman? Well, allow me to explain it to you. Clark Kent is a man who is one of the last of his kind, an alien from the world of Krypton, which was sadly destroyed in a tragedy, so he was sent to grow up on Earth as a baby. He was raised by 2 sweet, humble farmers in Kansas. Pretty fantastical idea, huh? Of course, but in many ways, this reflects the story of Siegel and Shuster. If this wasn't intentional, then you could have easily fooled me. You see, there's many themes that Superman tackles. The idea of the American dream, the inner good within all walks of life, protecting the workers and the unprotected, truth, justice, and so much more. But one theme that has been there since the beginning is the fact that Superman is good. Not because of some God-given mission or deep trauma or whatever other things you want to pull. No, Superman's just a good guy. He's just like everyone else. Sure, he has to hide his Kryptonian heritage to protect himself, kind of like what many Jewish people had to do during the period of time he was created. But he also is just like us. If they really wanted to make Superman some sort of ultra-powerful divine figure, then why would they make him a reporter? Oh, you know, the job that's supposed to be honest, no corruption, no laundering. No, a reporter is supposed to bring truth to the people, which is sadly a concept lost in our literal cyberpunk age. Seriously, all the artistic and creative choices that are made here all add up to make the theme pretty obvious. Now, I will say maybe I only pick up on this because I am a creative writer myself, but I don't think you need to be a writer or a literary genius to catch on to these pretty obvious themes. So, why is it then that I see many people complaining about how James Gunn's new Superman film doesn't get the character? I don't know. Maybe Man of Steel poisoned the public conscience, maybe we've been exclusively exposed to many evil Superman-type characters over the past decade. Not that I'm complaining, because a lot of them are actually super well written. I personally don't know, and honestly, it's not my goal to get to the deeper parts of that. Let me also say, this is not me defending James Gunn and his film. No, not really, because one, I don't need to defend him, he's a grown man. And two, because I believe we should be allowed to criticize everything and anything within fairness. And many criticisms should be made within good faith. So why am I going out of my way to argue a lot of these opinions and views? Honestly, it just irritates me as a Superman fan to see all these people sort of miss the mark. And honestly, I also just despise bad faith criticism. There's so much of it in our world. With that in mind, I don't plan on attacking anyone here, and I'm not really gonna name names or anything. Well, okay, I'm gonna name a couple names, so I guess that's a bit of a half-truth, but I'm really only bringing up people who've done a lot of bad faith criticism before, and it's not like I'm gonna be pulling up people's specific Twitter accounts or anything like that. Anyways, I like to consider this me more so trying to educate or maybe even explain some of the decisions we've seen taken in the trailers. If you disagree with me, hey, that's fine. In fact, I don't mind when people disagree with me. But if you're going to disagree with me, I'll probably suggest being well thought out if you plan on commenting on this video, because what's best for the human mind in art is a healthy discussion. Anyways, let me get to the first point I see a lot of people bring up. Point 1. The costume. One thing I've seen many people complain about in the beginning is the new costume, and I feel like this is coming more so from people not knowing where Gunn and his crew are pulling their inspirations from. This new suit isn't inspired by the usual Superman costume, like how the 1978 Superman film is pretty much a one-to-one interpretation of the original and traditional Superman costume. And the Man of Steel costume is heavily inspired by the New 52 era Superman. You can tell because there's not underwear on the outside. Instead, they're pulling from the seminal comic Kingdom Come by Mark Waid and Alex Ross, which is a pretty fundamental modern Superman story. It's sort of a mixing together elements of the original Superman costume and the Kingdom Come suit. Of course, I think a lot of complaints around the costume have died down over time, probably because we've had more time to sit with it. I sort of set this point at the front so that way I could just get it over with because it's a simple one to argue against. Point 2. Why is Superman getting hurt? I feel like this particular criticism mainly stems from two types of people. One is the type of person who wants Superman to be a power fantasy, and might have misogynistic tendencies, but I won't claim that for every person. And the second type are the people whose main introduction to Superman, or maybe their favorite piece of Superman media, is Zack Snyder's The Man of Steel. Now, I won't go too much into how I believe Man of Steel is a terrible adaptation of Superman, and really how Zack Snyder is just a bad, boring director in general, but a major issue with that film is how it sort of represents Superman as a godly or even Christ-like figure, which I'll add here. Writing Superman in this way is an extreme misunderstanding of the Superman mythos, and honestly a bit disrespectful to the original creators in my opinion. Superman, when written faithfully, is supposed to be the most human of us all. Sure, he's meant to be an incredibly powerful person, but he's also meant to represent the human struggle, specifically the struggle one must go through in order to be a good person. And I'll just say here, there's so many examples of Superman getting absolutely beaten bloody and absolutely getting defeated by his enemies. I really doubt he'd have to look far into all the Superman comic continuity to find various examples of Supes getting the snot knocked out of him. I mean, he's literally gotten beaten by Muhammad Ali. Though to be fair, Superman was depowered to an average human level. To be honest, I just kind of wanted to bring up that fun fact because it's a really cool fact. But seriously, there's so much examples of this in the world. You wouldn't have to look far to understand that Superman is not meant to be some sort of invulnerable, infallible individual. Point 3. This is just kid-friendly. I'ma be real, I have zero idea how to even take on this point without being simply rude about it, but I'm gonna try. You understand that Superman is meant to be a character for all ages, right? I feel like this comes from a certain kind of person who believes maturity comes from blood, guts, sex, violence, etc. Not saying stories aren't mature if they have these elements, but maturity doesn't come from these aesthetic things, but instead how a story handles its subject matter. And I'll try to say this as respectfully as possible. If you assume that a story having a bit of humor and whimsy means it isn't mature, then that actually comes from a lack of maturity. True maturity tends to come from being able to not take everything seriously. To understand that you need a mix of lighthearted parts with the harsh parts. If you're an avid reader, you might have heard of the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett, and I believe that book series has some of the most mature and honest stories in all of fiction, while also being completely absurd and very whimsical. To give a metaphor, just because something is colored brightly doesn't mean it can't be adult. Do you feel what I'm saying? Point 4. Bad faith. This is more of a general point of all the bad faith criticism I see around this film. Now, I'm not going to label all criticism that we've seen of the film so far as bad faith. No, in fact, I think very little criticism is bad faith. However, on the internet, it's not good criticism that gets the most spread. A lot of bad faith criticism spreads like wildfire on the internet, mainly because we live in an age of rage bait and outrage culture. And trust me, if you don't believe me, we've all fallen for it. There's just so much of it nowadays, and there's a reason I try to avoid nerd rage type behavior in many of my videos. But if I see a point that's clearly made in bad faith or just doesn't make any sense, or see a person who's always, if not very frequently, taking part in just awful takes, then I'm gonna point it out. I think the first big example of this is the infamous Shadiversity. And with all due respect, I don't think this guy could write his way out of a gas station bathroom. I mean, come on, do you really want to take this guy seriously when he had a meltdown over Princess Peach wearing pants in the Super Mario movie? Look, there's a lot of things you could criticize that movie for doing. It's an Illumination film after all. They haven't had the best quality track record. But yeah, he's the primary person I've seen argue that Superman should never get hurt and should be the ultimate power. Yeah, look, I'm not going to say much more about it, but if you know anything about Shadiversity, you should know about his shit takes. Also, he's literally made arguments for AI art taking over, so I don't think he gives a picometer of a shit about artistic integrity. Just letting you know. The second person I see frequently bringing up stupid points is Ben Shapiro. Do I actually have to tell you why he's a bad faith critic? Actually, you know what? Let me use a quote from him off his own Twitter.
Fact. Rap isn't music, and if you think it is, you're stupid.
Now, what gives him the authority to make this claim? Well, his dad's a music professor. Do you see what I mean by the rage bait? All I'll say is I'll clap back with this.
Fact. Ben Shapiro has been actively proven wrong multiple times for the ignorant statements he makes. And if you're the type of person who doesn't do the research into a topic and cites your dad as a viable source, that doesn't make you a philosopher, debater, or an intellectual. That makes you a child at the playground.
Oh, and before I end this part of the video, the critical drinker sucks too. Make that part of the quote-unquote message. Point 5. You don't like Superman. Here's my final point of the video, and I'm sorry, I usually hate to sound like a gatekeeper, but if you've listened to me all this time and are still trying to find ways to tell me I'm stupid or wrong or an ignoramus, I gotta ask you this. Do you even like Superman? Now, sit with me for a moment. Let me explain what I mean. Do you like Superman? Or do you like what Superman can do to validate yourself? Think about that for a moment, because I think it's a valid thing to ask. It's not an issue of if you find validation in a story or relate heavily to a character. That's perfectly fine. But are you bending that character to fit your own worldview or accepting the story for what it is? Mind you, I'm not saying that you can't critique anything, but one of the foundations of proper critique is trying to meet the artist halfway, to try and understand the points they're getting at, the themes of a piece, and so on. Which is why all this negativity and grifting around James Gunn's Superman kind of bewilders me, because, at least from what I've seen, I felt like this is what people have been wanting for years now. A rollback to what Superman actually was about. Sure, the movie is not out yet, and if the movie is bad, then hey, I'll be honest about it. But I'm not gonna get my nuts in a twist because Superman gets beaten or one joke doesn't land or another mega arbitrary reason to hate someone's work. I'm not gonna act like this video is gonna change everyone's mind, and I don't really plan on that. I kinda just got tired of seeing all this bad faith criticism and wanted to at least confront a lot of it on my own terms. I want to end this video by saying that I don't want my channel to be hyper negative and combative all the time. I think I've made that very clear in my previous videos, but I do think it's fair for me to tackle negative topics here and there too, because it also is an issue if I build my channel on exclusively being positive too. Because that's just not what I am, and I doubt that's how anyone else is too. I'm all about good vibes, yeah, but I also gotta be willing to be negative if I feel like I want to or need to be. So, I guess all I gotta ask is, do you agree with me? Do you not? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video, so hey, please like, comment, subscribe, and all that stuff. With all that being said, I'll see you next time.